Hi friends. I want to start with a question. And I want you to really sit with this question. I don't want you to answer it out loud. I want you to feel it somewhere deep in your chest where the truth lives dark. Have you ever walked into a room and felt completely invisible? Have you ever sat across from someone you loved? Your partner, your parent, your best friend, your boss, and watch them smile, watch them nod, watch them say, I'm fine. And known, absolutely known in your bones that they were lying not to hurt you. But because they didn't believe you could handle the truth, or worse, because they didn't think you were paying enough attention to even notice, that feeling, that moment of disconnection, that invisible wall of glass between you and another human being, that is the loneliest feeling on earth. And today I'm going to change that for you forever. Because what if I told you that every single person you've ever met in your life, every stranger on the street, every colleague who smiles at you in the hallway, every family member who sits quietly at the dinner table, every single one of them is already talking to you too. They are already telling you exactly who they are, exactly what they feel, exactly what they need. They've been talking to you your entire life. You just haven't been listening in the right language to today. I'm going to teach you that language. I'm going to teach you how to read anyone's mind in 60 seconds. Not through tricks, not through manipulation, not through some cold, calculated psychological game, but through the most powerful skill a human being can develop, the skill of seeing people, truly, deeply, completely seeing them. And when you can see people, friends, when you can really see them, you don't just understand them. You change them, you heal them, you move them. And in the process, you transform yourself, Rod. So stay with me. Because the next 45 minutes might be the most important conversation of your life. Let me tell you about a man named Daniel was 42 years old. He was a regional manager at a mid-sized company in Ohio. By every external measure, Daniel was successful. He drove a nice car. He lived in a house with 4 bedrooms. He coached his son's little league team on Saturdays. He took his wife to dinner on anniversaries. He was, as people say, doing fine, but Daniel hadn't had a real conversation in 11 years, not a real one. Not a conversation where he actually looked someone in the eyes and said, I see you, I understand you. Tell me what's really going on. His marriage was polite but hollow. His friendships were built on sports scores and weather, and how about those stock markets? His children talked to him about homework and weekend plans, but never, not once about what was happening inside their hearts. And one Tuesday morning, Daniel's 17-year-old daughter walked into the kitchen before school, poured herself a glass of orange juice, and said in the most casual voice imaginable, Dad, I don't think I want to live anymore. And Daniel froze, not because he didn't love her. No, he loved her more than oxygen, not because he didn't care. He cared so much it physically hurt him to think about. He froze because he realized, standing there in that kitchen, in his suit and his tie with his briefcase on the counter, that he had no idea who his daughter was. He had been physically present in her life for 17 years, and he had missed her entirely. She had been telling him for years, in the way she picked at her food, in the way she always sat with her back to the wall at restaurants, in the way she laughed a half second after everyone else, like she was reading a script of a normal teenager's emotions, in the way she hugged him, arms wrapped around herself inside the hug, like she was protecting something fragile at her core. She was protecting something fragile at her core. She had been telling him everything. And he hadn't known the language. That's where Daniel's real story begins. He got his daughter help. She's doing beautifully today. I want you to know that. She's in college. She's painting. She laughs before everyone else now. That laugh you hear first in a room, that's who she became. But the journey wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy, and it changed Daniel completely. He left his job. Not because he had to, because he chose to. He became a counselor. He spent 3 years studying human behavior, emotional intelligence, nonverbal communication. He became one of the most sought-after therapists in his state. And he told me, when I interviewed him, that the single most important thing he learned, the thing that changed everything, was this. People never stop communicating. They only stop using words. Write that down somewhere. In your heart, write that down. People never stop communicating. They only stop using words. Human beings that nobody teaches you in school. Nobody teaches you in school. Nobody teaches you in college. Nobody sits you down at any point in your life and says, hey, let me explain how people actually work. We go through 12, 16, 20 years of formal education, and we learn calculus, and we learn the dates of historical battles, and we learn how to dissect frogs. But nobody teaches us how to understand each other. And that gap, friends, that gap between people, it is the source of most of the pain in the world. Most divorces don't happen because people stop loving each other. They happen because people stop understanding each other. Most business failures don't happen because of bad products or bad markets. They happen because of miscommunication, misunderstanding, misread signals between human beings. Most of the distance between parents and children, between friends who drifted apart, between people who once meant everything to each other, most of that distance is not inevitable. It was created by misreading, by missing the signals, by not knowing the language. So let's learn the language, and here's where I want to start, because this is the foundation. This is the ground under everything else I'm going to tell you today. Every human being on this planet is carrying two versions of themselves at all times. There is the performed self, the version they show the world, the version that says, I'm good, thanks, when someone asks how they're doing, the version that posts the highlight reel on social media, the version that wears confidence like armor and laughs at the right moments and knows how to fill silences with the right sounds. And then there is the actual self, the version that exists underneath. The version that wakes up at 3 in the morning with a specific kind of fear that doesn't have a name. The version that remembers every single person who ever made them feel small. The version that hopes desperately, silently, constantly, for connection, for recognition, for someone to just once look at them and say, I see you. You matter. You are not alone. Reading someone's mind in 60 seconds is not about magic. It's about learning to look past the performed self and see the actual self. It's about understanding the 7 invisible signals that every human being broadcasts all the time, without realizing it, without being able to stop it. 7 signals. And I'm going to walk through every single one of them with you today. But first, I want to talk about why most people are so bad at this. Because you might be thinking, I'm a pretty good judge of character. I can usually tell when something's off, and maybe you can. But I want you to consider the possibility that you've been filtering everything you observe about people through your own story, through your own wounds, through your own assumptions. There was a researcher named Solomon Asch who did a remarkable experiment in the 1950s. He showed people a card with a line on it. Then he showed them 3 other lines and asked them to identify which one matched the first line. The correct answer was completely obvious. A child could see it. But when actors in the room all gave the wrong answer out loud before the real participant answered, about 75% of real participants gave the wrong answer at least once, not because they couldn't see, because they second-guessed what they saw. 4. This is what happens when we try to read people. We see the truth, the nervous hand, the forced smile, the voice that goes up just slightly at the end of a statement that should have been confident. We see it. And then our brain says, no, everyone else seems to think they're fine. You're overthinking it, don't make it weird. And we override what we see with what we're told to believe. Dot reading people requires the courage to trust what you see. That is the first and perhaps most important lesson. Torrent lesson signals. Dot signal number 1. The eyes ought not eye contact. Most people talk about eye contact and they teach you to hold someone's gaze for a certain number of seconds and then look away and then look back. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what the eyes do when the person doesn't know you're watching them. The eyes are the only part of the human face that cannot fully lie. Your mouth can smile when you're miserable. Your body can stand tall when you're crumbling. Your voice can stay level and professional when your heart is breaking. But your eyes, specifically the area around your eyes, will always tell the truth. There is a difference between a smile that reaches the eyes and one that doesn't. Psychologists call this a Duchenne smile, named after the French neurologist Guillaume Duchenne, who first mapped it in the 1860s. A genuine smile engages the orbicularis oculi, the muscle around the eye socket. It creates those little crinkles at the corners. It slightly narrows the eyes. It's almost impossible to fake convincing. When you see someone smile with their mouth and their eyes stay wide open, perfectly still, perfectly smooth, pay attention. Not because they're lying to you, but because something is working very hard to hold together. They are performing happiness that isn't quite coming from the inside. But the eyes tell you more than happiness. Watch what happens to someone's eyes when they talk about different subjects. The eyes will go slightly out of focus when someone is remembering something painful. The eyes will sharpen and brighten when someone talks about something they genuinely love. The pupils will dilate, actually physically expand, when someone looks at something or someone they find attractive or exciting. Not just romantically, intellectually, creatively, passionately, creatively. I once sat across from a man in a business meeting who spent 40 minutes telling me about how excited he was about his new project. His words were enthusiastic, his gestures were expansive. But every single time he said the name of the project, his eyes went flat, just for a fraction of a second. Just a flicker. And I knew, before he would admit it to himself for another 6 months, that he didn't believe in what he was building. Stopped watching people's eyes when they talk. Not to be creepy, not to analyze them like a lab subject, but to really listen. Because the eyes will show you what the mouth is too afraid to say. Signal number 2. The voice. Not by say. How they say it. The human voice is a symphony of psychological information. The speed of speech, the pauses, the places where the breath catches, all of it is data. All of it is signal. Most people know that when someone is nervous, their voice goes up in pitch. Their words come faster or slower than normal. They clear their throat. They add filler words. But there's a more subtle thing happening in the human voice that most people miss entirely. Listen for what I call the gravity change. This is the moment in a conversation when someone's voice gets heavier. Not louder, not softer, heavier. Like there's something pressing down on the words. You'll hear it when someone talks about a subject that carries deep emotional weight for them. Sometimes they don't even know it's there. They might be telling you a story that they've told dozens of times, a story they've practiced into smoothness and casualness, and then they hit a certain word or a certain moment and their voice drops 3 tones and slows by half. That's where the real story lives. That is the place where, if you were paying attention, if you leaned slightly forward and said, "Wait, tell me more about that part," everything would change. That person in that moment would feel more seen and understood than they have felt in years. Because most people blow right past the gravity change. They're waiting for the end of the story. They're already preparing their own story to tell in response. They miss the moment. Don't miss the moment. Don't miss the moment. There's another vocal signal that is even more telling. And it's one that almost nobody talks about. It's the laugh that doesn't match the moment. When someone laughs at something that isn't funny. When they chuckle at their own pain. When they joke about a loss, a failure, a wound. The laugh is almost always a gate. It's the thing when you hear that laugh, the self-deprecating laugh about something that actually cost them deeply. Instead of laughing along, instead of moving on, try saying softly, "Yeah, but that must have been really hard." And then be quiet and watch what happens to their face. What happens is usually one of 2 things. Either they look at you with something close to shock, because nobody has ever looked past a laugh before, and they tell you the truth, or they laugh again, louder, and change the subject. And either way, you've learned something profound about them. Signal number 3, posture and movement, but not the way you think. You've heard the standard body language advice. Arms crossed means defensive. Leaning forward means engaged. Open palms mean honesty. And yes, there's truth in all of that. But I want to go deeper than the catalog of positions. What I want you to watch is the relationship between a person's body and space. Some people walk into a room and immediately begin to expand. They take up space. They sit with their elbows out and their legs apart and their gestures wide. They look at the center of the room when they enter, not the walls. These are people who have been taught or taught themselves that they have a right to exist, that they have a right to exist, that their presence is welcome, that the room belongs to them as much as to anyone else. Other people walk into a room and immediately begin to contract. They fold. They hug their elbows to their sides. They look for the wall. They sit at the edge of the chair, not fully in it, as if they are preparing to leave before they've even arrived. They are saying with every inch of their body, "I'm sorry for taking up space. I'll try not to be too much." Those contracted people understand something about them. They were taught at some point in their lives, probably early, probably by someone they loved and trusted, that their presence was too much, that they asked for too much, that they were inconvenient, and they've been trying to apologize for existing ever since. They are not shy. They are not introverted. They are not just like that. They are carrying something. And when you see that, when you recognize it, the way you treat them changes completely. You don't crowd them. You give them space and then you invite them into yours. You ask their opinion in small, specific ways that give them an easy entry point. You laugh at something they say before they've finished saying it so they know it's safe to complete the thought. You make the room smaller and safer in theirs, and something remarkable happens. They unfold. Right in front of you, not all at once, not in one conversation, but they begin to unfold. That's not reading someone's mind. That's something more powerful. That's meeting someone in the place where they actually are. Dot signal number 4. The things people carry. Dot. I mean this both literally and metaphorically. Watch what people do with their hands when they're uncomfortable. Some people reach for their phone. Some people adjust their glasses or their hair or their collar. Some people pick at the label on their water bottle. Some people grip a pen or a cup or the edge of the table. These objects become what psychologists call transitional objects, stand-ins for the security of something familiar in an unfamiliar or threatening situation. A person who constantly needs something in their hands during a difficult conversation is not being distracted. They are grounding themselves. They are trying to hold on. Understanding this means you don't get frustrated that they won't look at you. It means you slow down. It means you let there be silence. It means you give them the gift of unhurried time. But I also mean metaphorically. Every person you meet is carrying an invisible weight, and that weight has a specific shape. Some people carry grief. You can feel it in the slightly slowed pace of their movement, the way joy always seems to arrive at them a moment late, like it has to travel further to reach them. Some people carry shame. You can see it in the way they almost apologize before disagreeing with you, the way they laugh self-deprecatingly before you've given them any reason to. Some people carry anger, and this is the important one, because anger almost never looks like anger from the inside. From the outside, it looks like competence, like sharpness, like someone who just has very high standards and low tolerance for nonsense. But underneath the precision and the standards, there is almost always a person who was once helpless in a situation and promised themselves, silently, fiercely, that they would never feel that helpless again. When you understand what someone is carrying, when you can feel the weight, even if you can't name it precisely, you stop taking their behavior personally. And the moment you stop taking it personally, you become free. You become free. You become the most powerful person in any room. But signal number 5. What people talk about when they don't have to talk about anything. This is one of my favorites, because this one is about freedom. When a person has completely free choice over what to discuss. At a party, at a casual dinner, in small talk before a meeting starts, what do they choose? Some people always talk about problems, not their problems necessarily, but problems generally. The traffic was terrible. The news is appalling. Did you hear about what happened to such and such? The world is going in the wrong direction. These people are not pessimists, Harun, not pessimists. At least pessimism is not the root cause. These people have usually developed an intimate relationship with difficulty. At some point in their lives, things went wrong so consistently that they trained their minds to scan for danger. They talk about problems because problems feel like home. And you cannot judge them for this. You can only love them through it. Other people, when given free choice, talk about other people. Not gossip exactly, though sometimes yes, but the ongoing narrative of the humans in their lives. The friend is going through this thing, and their neighbor just had that happen. And the lady at the coffee shop every morning has the most interesting story. These people are weavers. The web of human connection is their primary reality. They are often the most empathic people in any room, and also sometimes the most emotionally overwhelmed, because they carry so many other people's stories alongside their own. And then there are people who, in free conversation, always eventually find their way to the thing that lights them up. The passion project, the idea they've been turning over, the book they read that changed how they see everything. You have to be paying attention to catch it, because they often bury it in the middle of something ordinary, almost embarrassed to let it show, but it's there. And when you catch it, when you say, wait, back up, tell me about that idea, you have just made a friend for life. Because you saw the thing, they were almost too afraid to show. Signal number 6. How people treat people who can't help them. This is the most reliable signal of all for the core character of a person. Not how they treat you, how they treat the parking attendant, the waiter, the receptionist, the janitor, the intern. I'm not just talking about basic politeness. I'm talking about whether they make eye contact, whether they use the person's name if they have it, whether they say please and thank you not reflexively but actually, meaning whether they pause between the please and the thank you and look at the person like they're a person. There's a hotel concierge in Chicago named Marcus who told me something I'll never forget. He said, I can tell you within 30 seconds of someone arriving whether their marriage is happy. I asked him how. He said, watch how they treat me when their spouse is watching versus when their spouse isn't looking. If it changes, if they're charming and gracious when she's there and dismissive when she's away, then they're performing kindness rather than practicing it. And nobody can perform it forever in a marriage. He was describing the performance self versus the actual self again. When someone is kind only when there is an audience, they're not kind, they're strategic. When someone is kind to the person who cannot benefit them in any way, when they're kind to the person who will likely forget the interaction within an hour, that is the true measure. Watch how people treat invisible people. It will tell you everything you need to know about who they are. When the stakes are real. Signal number 7, the gap. This is perhaps the most sophisticated of the 7 signals, and it's the one I want to spend the most time on. Because this is the one that will transform your relationships more than any other. The gap is the space between what someone says they want and how they're actually living. Every single person has this gap. Every single one, without exception. And the size of the gap is not the measure of a person's hypocrisy or weakness. It's the measure of their unresolved pain. Someone says they want a relationship built on honesty, but they tell their partner they're fine when they're not. The gap is showing you that they want honesty from others, but they haven't yet found the safety to offer it themselves. The wound isn't lack of commitment to honesty. The wound is that at some point, their honesty was used against them. Someone says they want financial security, but they spend impulsively every time they feel anxious. The gap is showing you that somewhere in their nervous system, scarcity feels more familiar than abundance. And the spending is a way of momentarily discharging the anxiety of having something to lose. When you see someone's gap, and I mean see it with compassion, not with judgment, you have just seen the most intimate part of who they are. You have seen the place where their dream and their wound intersect. And here is what I want you to understand. You cannot fix someone's gap for them. You cannot close it by pointing it out, by arguing with it, by pleading with them to just be consistent. People don't change because someone identified their inconsistency. People change when someone loves them well enough and long enough in the gap that the gap starts to feel safe enough to close. That is the work. That is the real work of human connection. Now I want to stop for a moment because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, this sounds amazing in theory, but I don't have time to do a full psychological assessment of every person I meet. And you're right, you don't. And that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is pay attention. That's all. Just pay attention. The difference between someone who can read a room and someone who can't isn't intelligence. It isn't education. It isn't some special gift that only certain people are born with. The difference is where they put their attention. Most of us walk through life with our attention turned almost entirely inward. What do I look like right now? What should I say next? Did that land well? Are they judging me? Will this work? The running internal monologue consumes so much of our cognitive bandwidth, we simply don't have resources left to actually observe the person in front of us. Doubting people requires the revolutionary act of temporarily surrendering your concern with yourself. It requires, even for a few minutes, even in the middle of a conversation, setting down the burden of your own story and picking up genuine curiosity about someone else's. And friends, I want to tell you, that act of genuine curiosity is not just good for them. It is one of the most healing things you can do for yourself. Let me tell you about Maya was 29 years old, and she came to a workshop I was running on emotional intelligence with a very specific problem. She had been in 3 serious relationships, and each one had ended, in her words, for the same mysterious reason. The men she dated always described her as caring, intelligent, beautiful, and somehow not quite present, like talking to someone who was listening with one ear. Like being with someone who was always slightly somewhere else. Maya was devastated by this feedback because she felt present. She felt like she cared deeply. She thought about the men she dated constantly. But when we did an exercise in the workshop, something became painfully clear. I asked everyone to pair with someone they didn't know and have a 5-minute conversation. The only rule was find out something about your partner that you wouldn't learn in a normal 5-minute conversation. Something real, something underneath. Most people struggled with this. It requires listening in a particular way. But one pair, Maya and a man named James, something remarkable happened. James, within 4 minutes, was talking about the death of his father the year before and how it had changed his relationship with time. He was almost crying. He was almost crying. And Maya was sitting across from him, looking genuinely moved. Afterward, I asked James how the conversation felt. He said, I've known my best friend for 15 years and he doesn't know what I just told her. Then I asked Maya what she had done differently in those 5 minutes compared to her normal conversations. She went quiet. And then she said, I stopped waiting to respond. I just listened. I didn't think about what I was going to say. I wasn't planning. I was just there. What made you do that? I asked. She thought about it for a long time. And then she said, I guess I stopped thinking about what he thought of me. I just got curious about him. That was the shift. That was the whole thing. When she wasn't worried about being perceived correctly, she became actually present. And presence is magnetic. Presence is the rarest and most intoxicating thing one human can offer another. James and Maya are married now. 3 years, I was at the wedding. True story. Because here's what I want you to understand about reading people, about this skill, this ability to see and understand another human being in their fullness. It is not a manipulative power. It is not something you do to someone. It is something you do with someone. It is not a technique. It is a posture. It is a posture of complete, undivided, compassionate attention. And when you bring that posture to another person, when they feel truly seen by you, something alchemical happens. They open, they trust, they offer you the most honest, unguarded version of themselves. And in doing so, they give you access not just to their mind, but to their heart. This is why the greatest leaders throughout history have shared this quality. This is why certain people walk into a room and everything shifts, not because of their title, not because of their money, not because of their looks, because they have cultivated the ability to make every single person in their presence feel like the most important person in the room. Think about the greatest conversations you've ever had in your life. Think about the person who made you feel most understood, most seen, most met. Was it the person who talked the most? Was it the person who gave you the best advice? Was it the person who solved your problem? Probably not. Totally not. It was almost certainly the person who listened with their whole body, who asked the one question that unlocked something you'd been carrying for years, who looked at you like they had nowhere else to be and nothing else on their mind, and you were, in that moment, their entire world. We remember people like that for decades. We carry them with us. They become part of our interior landscape. The voices in our head that sound like our best selves. They help form us. You can be that person for someone. You can be that person for everyone. Now, I want to go deeper. Because we've been talking about reading others, and that is important and necessary. But I want to make the case that the real mastery, the level that changes not just your relationships, but your entire life, begins with reading yourself. You cannot accurately perceive another human being through a distorted lens. And if you carry unresolved pain, unfelt grief, unacknowledged fear, that pain, that grief, that fear acts as a lens through which you see everyone. Everything gets filtered through it. Everything gets colored by it. The person who was betrayed will see deception everywhere. The person who is abandoned will interpret distance as rejection. The person who was controlled will see manipulation in normal requests. This isn't weakness. This is human neurology. The brain is a pattern recognition machine, and it finds what it expects to find. Reading others clearly requires the ongoing, courageous, sometimes terrifying work of reading yourself first. I want to ask you something right now, and I want you to really answer it. Not the answer you'd give in a job interview. The real answer. Is the emotion you're least comfortable feeling. For most people, it's one of these: fear, grief, anger, or shame. Whatever yours is, I can almost guarantee that it's shaping every difficult relationship in your life. If you're uncomfortable with fear, you'll mistake your partner's caution for weakness and push them into decisions they're not ready for. If you're uncomfortable with grief, you'll rush yourself and others through loss without letting them be in it long enough to integrate it. If you're uncomfortable with anger, you'll be confused and destabilized by people who are angry, and you'll either collapse under their intensity or run from it. If you're uncomfortable with shame, you'll become very good at identifying everyone else's mistakes and very poor at sitting with your own. The emotions we haven't made peace with in ourselves are the emotions we cannot hold space for in others. There was a therapist I admired enormously named Irvin Yalom who wrote about what he called existential givens, the fundamental, unavoidable truths of human existence. We will die. We are ultimately alone. We are free, which means we are responsible. And life has no inherent meaning. We must create it. He argued that most psychological suffering comes not from these truths themselves, but from our refusal to look at them directly. And I think about that in the context of human connection. Most of the distance between people comes not from genuinely irreconcilable differences, but from the terror of being known. From the belief that if someone truly saw all of us, the fear, the uncertainty, the petty jealousies and secret shames and middle of the night catastrophizing, they would leave. And so we show them the performed self, and they show us their performed self. And we both feel lonely in the presence of each other, and we don't understand why, because we are right there. We are physically together. Why does it feel like we're alone? Because two masks cannot touch, even when the people wearing them are desperate to reach each other. Reading people, being able to say, I see who you actually are. I see past the mask. I see the fear and the grief and the wound and the hope underneath. And I'm still here. I'm still interested. I'm not leaving. That is one of the greatest gifts one human being can give another. And you know what the second greatest gift is? Letting someone read you. Don't let yourself be seen. Not taking off the mask long enough to let someone actually reach you. Don't want to tell you about a moment in my own life. Because I ask you to be honest, and it's only right that I'm honest with you. There was a period in my life. I was in my mid-30s when I was by any outward measure thriving. I was doing work I believed in. I had people around me who cared about me. I was technically fine, and I was completely alone, not in a way I could explain to anyone. Not in a way that would have made sense if I tried to put words to it. But there was this persistent, low-grade sense of unreality. Like I was watching my own life through thick glass, like everyone around me was experiencing something genuine that I was somehow adjacent to, but not quite inside of, but not quite inside of. I had, without realizing it, become so good at managing how I was perceived, so skilled at presenting the version of myself that was competent, engaged, helpful, strong, that I had lost access to the version of myself that was actually having the experience of being alive. I had spent so many years reading other people that I had forgotten how to read myself, the thing that broke it open. And I say broke deliberately because it wasn't gentle, was a conversation with a woman I'll call Lena. She was not a therapist, not a mentor, not someone I'd known for years. She was someone I met at a conference. We had dinner with a group of people and then somehow ended up in a separate conversation for 3 hours. And at some point she said to me, in the most matter-of-fact, unceremonious way, "You know, you're really good at making people feel understood. But I notice you don't let anyone do it for you. What are you protecting?" I laughed. The laugh that isn't a laugh. The gate laugh. She waited off, and I felt something in my chest crack open like ice on a spring river. And for the first time in years, I said something true. Not something helpful or wise or carefully constructed. Just something true. I said, I think I'm afraid that if I stopped being useful, I'd have no reason to be here. The silence that followed that sentence was the most terrifying and freeing silence of my life. She just nodded, slowly, and said, "Yeah, I thought so." Not with pity, not with alarm, just with recognition. Like she'd seen it before. Like it made complete sense. Like it didn't change a single thing about how she saw me. And something in me that had been clenched for years began very slowly to unclench. That is what it feels like to be read. Really read. When someone looks past all of your carefully constructed competence and sees the scared, uncertain, sometimes lost person underneath and says, essentially, You don't have to perform for me. You're okay. You are okay. Not okay. I want to bring this all together because we've covered a lot of ground. The seven signals, the performed self and the actual self, the work of reading yourself before you can read others. And I want to make sure you leave today with something you can actually use. Something that will change your next conversation, your next relationship, your next moment with another human being. There are three practices I want to give you. Not theories, practices, things you do. But practice one, the 60-second pause. Before your next significant conversation, before a difficult discussion with a partner, before a meeting where tension is likely, before you pick up the phone to call someone you've been avoiding, take 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds. And in that 60 seconds, ask yourself three questions. First, what am I bringing into this conversation? Am I tired, resentful, afraid, excited, distracted? Know what you're carrying. Because whatever you're carrying will shape how you hear everything that's said. Second, what is this person likely carrying right now? Not what's wrong with them. What are they dealing with? What weight might they have walked in with before this conversation started? Third, what does this person most need from this specific conversation? Not what you need to say to them. What do they need? Do they need to feel heard, reassured, challenged, supported? Simply accompanied 60 seconds, three questions. It will transform how you walk into every interaction. That practice too. The follow the energy question. In every conversation, there will be a moment. There's always a moment where the energy in the room shifts, where something changes in the other person. Their voice catches, their eyes go somewhere else. They laugh at something that wasn't funny. They rush past a word or a phrase with slightly more speed than the rest of the sentence. When you notice that shift, and you will notice it because you're paying attention now, ask one simple question. Not a brilliant, insightful, psychologically sophisticated question. Just tell me more about that. That's it. 4 words. Tell me more about that. Not what do you mean by that. Which can feel interrogative. Not why do you feel that way. Which can feel analytical. Just tell me more about that. Which is an invitation, not a question. Which says, I noticed, I'm interested. Take me with you. You will be astonished at what people say after those 4 words when they've never been given the space to say it before. Practice 3. The gift of being last. Start in your next group conversation, a meeting, a dinner, a gathering of any kind. Try something that will feel deeply uncomfortable. Try being the last to speak, not as a strategy, not to look thoughtful or let others feel heard so they listen to you better. Actually be the last to speak because you genuinely want to hear what everyone else is going to say before you decide what you think. Because here's what happens when you wait. When you're not formulating your response while someone is still talking, your brain does something wonderful. It actually listens. It starts to hear not just the words, but the spaces between the words. It starts to integrate not just the content, but the emotion. It starts to pick up the 7 signals. It starts to read, and when you finally do speak, you will say something that is shaped by and responsive to what everyone else has said. And the people in the room will feel, in a way they might not be able to articulate, that you were actually there with them, that you heard them, that they exist for you as real, full, complex people, not just as an audience for your own thoughts. Be last to speak. It's the hardest and most powerful thing you can do in any group dynamic. Now, I want to shift the conversation one more time because I've been talking a lot about the skill of reading people, about the ability to perceive, to understand, to decode signals and close the distance between humans. And all of that is real and important and true. But I want to make absolutely sure before we go that we've talked about what this skill is for. It's not for winning arguments. It's not for influencing people into doing what you want. It's not for making yourself look empathic or intelligent or emotionally sophisticated. It's not for getting ahead in business or getting someone to fall in love with you or winning the approval of people who don't see you yet. It's for love. That's what it's for. In the broadest, most radical sense of that word, when we learn to read people, when we actually develop this capacity to see past the performance and into the person, we are choosing to love the world more precisely. We are choosing to meet people where they actually are rather than where we wish they were or where they pretend to be. There's a quote that is often attributed to various writers. The origin is somewhat contested, but the truth of it is undeniable. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Reading people is how you learn about the battle. Reading people is how you stop judging and start understanding. How you stop reacting and start responding. How you stop seeing people as obstacles or tools or mirrors for your own reflection and start seeing them as who they really are. Beings of extraordinary complexity, hearts full of stories, wounds working hard to become wisdom, dreams too fragile to show to just anyone. There is a woman in her 80s living in a nursing home in rural Vermont. Her name is Agnes. And every single day, a young man named Theo, 22 years old, works there as an aide, comes into her room and they talk. Not about her medications, not about her schedule. He sits in the chair by the window and he asks her what she's thinking about that day, what she remembers, what she misses, what she's proud of, what she wishes she'd done differently. What she hopes for, our darkness told a journalist who was doing a story on the nursing home. Theo is the only person in my life who looks at me like I'm still becoming something. Everyone else looks at me like I'm finished. That look, that specific look of seeing a person as still in motion, still evolving, still arriving, that is the look that reading people gives. Because you understand that everyone, regardless of age or circumstance or how much of their life is behind them, is still carrying both a wound and a dream. Always both. Always dot. And when you look at someone with that understanding, they feel it. Something in them responds to being seen as dynamic, as complex, as more than the story they've settled for. And some part of them that was very quietly starting to go to sleep begins to stir. That is the power you carry when you really learn to see people. You become a mirror that shows people their best self, not a flattering mirror. I'm not talking about false praise or empty affirmation. I mean a clear mirror, one that reflects accurately, one that shows them, here is what I actually see in you. Here is the strength behind the apology. Here is the intelligence behind the nervous laugh. Here is the love behind the awkward silence. Here is the courage it takes to keep going through everything you're carrying. You can be someone's clear mirror. And you don't need any credentials for that. You don't need a degree or a title or a platform. You need attention, compassion, and the willingness to be truly, fully, courageously present. I want to close with a story. This is the story I come back to more than any other. The one that sits at the center of everything I believe about human connection. There was a man on a bridge. This is a real story. He was in his late 20s. That no one would care enough, for long enough to notice he was gone. That the gap between who he needed to be for the world and who he actually was had become too wide to hold. He was standing at the railing when a woman walked by. She was a stranger. She was in her 50s,